So let's first begin what has been Iran's next move. As I've said, 7 days have now been completed of this U.S. and Israel joint strikes that was carried out on Iran. And now U.S. is targeting Iran's naval vessels. The U.S. mission is to now sink Iranian Navy, as the Central Command has said that these strikes have now intensified when it comes to the Iranian drone carrier that has been hit and a warship that has been set ablaze at the sea. U.S. strikes have now carried out on a major Iranian vessel, and this is a confirmation that is now coming in from CENTCOM saying that the Iranian Navy is now under fire. So let's get you a basic understanding, because President Trump in his addresses have been saying that there has been a virtual dissemination or a virtual destruction that has now taken place of the military forces of Iran, in particular when it comes to the Iranian Navy. So as far as the biggest development that came in of the ship that was returning in the Indian Ocean, which had participated in a naval exercise with India, and it was struck. And near when it comes to Sri Lanka, where we are looking at naval operations that have also been taken place on part of the forces there and the Navy there in Sri Lanka, and also in India, which is now assisting when it comes to the other ship of Iran that has now almost reaching there. What has now been said that the U.S. Central Command says that American forces have struck an Iranian drone carrier, warship, and several other naval assets, with the vessel reported on fire during the strike. Now, officials have been claiming that over 30 Iranian ships have been destroyed since the campaign began, marking one of the largest naval blows to the Iranian fleet. And this is what the Central Command of the U.S. saying, that they are not holding back on the mission to sink the entire Iranian Navy. Now, an Iranian drone carrier, roughly the size of a World War II aircraft carrier, that was struck and is now on fire. As far as these developments that are now being shared, let's quickly connect with Srinjoy, who is joining us. Srinjoy, good morning. Day 7 since we first got the news, but right now what US is after is a complete destruction when it comes to the military might of Iran.
Yes, you saw the beginnings. You saw the Revolutionary Guard being destroyed, headquarters. You saw the supreme leader being killed. You saw the missile bases attacked, the launchers attacked, the missile manufacturing factories attacked. You saw the nuclear facilities being attacked. Now the Americans are attacking the Navy and the Air Force. Now the Navy, particularly, the President Donald Trump said that now Iran does not have an Air Force, Iran does not have a Navy. We know about the ship, the frigate, that was struck by a torpedo, the first time since World War II that a torpedo has hit a warship. And that happened in the Indian Ocean, in international waters, not that long ago. Now Iran's Navy is being attacked by the Americans. The Americans say that most of the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the Persian Gulf.
Absolutely, because those were pretty dramatic pictures that came in, but also a concern that has now been raised that virtually happened in India's backyard. We have also Colonel Utkarsh, who continues to be with us here in the studios. Good morning to you, sir. And we also have Pathikrit Ren, who is connected with us. Good morning to you as well, Pathikrit. Sir, Utkarsh, sir, when you look at these pictures that have been coming in, President Trump says Iran is being demolished ahead of schedule and at levels that people have never seen, claiming that the country has now no air force, no defense, and now no navy.
See, demolition of Iranian Navy was a foregone conclusion. If you compare the size and quantum of American Navy, which was deployed against it, Iranian Navy is a very basic Navy. They don't have any thing which is bigger than a destroyer. So this was a foregone conclusion, and the American might is really supreme. Now you come to the Air Force. Again, the same thing was there, but the Iranians have held them back for 7 days, and they are still fighting. Though they have America and Israel have been able to get the air superiority over Iran skies, but they are still fighting, and it is not safe. Iran never had an air force. Iran had the basic F-14 Tomcats. That's all they had. And then they flew this Yak 130, which is basically a trainer aircraft. So expecting that Iran will put up a brave face, but what Iran has inflicted by its missiles and drones and turned this entire conflict into a regional war, it should not be taken lightly. Iran has fought very well with its improvised weapons and is still fighting. These two assets were there. Now Iran is saying you are most welcome to start a land warfare. So that is where Iran is strong, and Iran is telling them, in fact, challenging the US, you come on the land now.
Well, Patikrit, because here is what President Trump says, that we have massive ammunition, which people don't understand, then they have more where it comes to all of the other countries where there are US bases. Now, US bases or the forces there of the United States, clearly looking at the pictures that have been coming in, have not been holding back when it comes to the mission to sink the entire Iranian Navy.
Well, Iranian Navy, in terms of the frigates and the destroyers, they always had very limited number of that. But what Iran has in terms of Navy, that's a classic example of asymmetric warfare capability. They have thousands of missile gunboats. Those gunboats may not be very big, maybe with just a displacement of 20 ton, 30 ton, but they carry anti-ship missiles, and they have thousands of those, primarily under IRGC Navy. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has a separate navy from the Iranian Navy, and they are very good in terms of creating disruptions, creating problems. See, they are no match against the aircraft carrier. Secondly, when it comes to, again, they never had a substantive air force, as Colonel Sir rightly mentioned, a few rudimentary F-5 and very old F-14s. But what they have is, number one, hundreds and thousands of these loitering munitions, the Shahid drones, and a very, very robust military-industrial complex with the surge capacity. Surge capacity means at a very short notice, they can ramp up the production, and that is visible. Trump can say, and there is absolutely no denial that United States has a very, very large arsenal, but they had the arsenal in case of Afghanistan as well. In case of Afghanistan, 20 years they took, several presidents, thousands of lives and trillions of dollars to replace Taliban with Taliban. It is the same Iran against which they supported Iraq for 8 years to fight against Iran from 1980 to 88. And even then they could not defeat this regime. So this regime is down, but it's not out. And if you look at what the Americans are trying to do right now, to provoke and push in the Kurdish rebels, that will create a new dimension, because if the Kurds get in and they fight against the Iranian regime, the Turks will not take it very lightly, because the Turks consider the Kurds as an arch rival. They do not want any kind of recognition to the Kurdish forces, because they know that tomorrow it can have a problem in their own country.
Iran has warned now, in this counter that is now coming in, where the US will bitterly regret the torpedo attack on the Iranian naval ship in the Indian Ocean. Iran, however, is still being hammered by American-Israeli strikes launched, expanding drone attacks in retaliation that had led to explosions across the region. But in the meantime, let's get you another angle there, because the US-Israel war on Iran has now triggered turbulence in the Indian Ocean. An American submarine torpedoed and sank the Iranian naval ship off the southern coast of Sri Lanka, killing over 85 people. Now, this was the first sinking of an enemy ship torpedoed by the US since World War II, and this incident occurred the warship that was returning from a joint naval exercise in India. A day later, now several questions are being raised about the stability of the Indian subcontinent and the wider South Asian waters. But before you get to the blame game and how does this escalation, however, possibly impact India, let's take you through as far as what the Iranian foreign minister said in this warning to United States. He completely has gone out to slam the United States of America, where Agarji says that US has now perpetrated an atrocity at sea 2,000 miles away from Iran's shore, and frigate Dina, which is a guest of Indian Navy, has now struck in a foreign waters without any warning. And the United States, he says, will come to bitterly regret this action. Meanwhile, when we speak of what the experts have been suggesting, because India cannot be faulted for this incident, We are looking at how multiple leaders in the opposition have been raising questions saying that will India now be also dragged in this war? Because ultimately one has to remember that through this strike on IRIS Dina, that was in India's strategic waters. It wasn't just in its jurisdiction, but it was in international waters. And here is where the distinction lies and what you need to understand through the key factors as to why India cannot get involved. Now, US, the factor that what we are picking up where it has now sunk this Iranian warship and why India cannot get involved, because the incident happened near Sri Lanka's exclusive economic zone. Now, India, however, has a limited jurisdiction over the area in the Indian Ocean. Now, as far as the Iranian warship that was sunk, it was sunk outside India's exclusive economic zone. Now, this exclusive economic zone that extends about 370 kilometers from India's coastline. And however, the experts suggest that India here is not at fault and cannot be hence held responsible. Now, as far as when it comes to these developments that have been taking place, let's get you, however, what can be actually argued is the fact that the US ignored India's sensitivities as the Iranian ship was in these waters because of Delhi's invitation to conduct the naval drills. Now, experts argue that as per protocol for this exercise, the ships cannot carry ammunition and IRIS Dina was defenseless, and India's responsibility is only moral and on human ground. On the other hand, the torpedo strike prompted questions also from the former US officials about whether Washington's war aims of destroying all of Iran's military were legal under international law. So let's get you the questions that are now being raised over this US action. That for the first time since WW2, that is World War II, it is now being witnessed. Now the questions which are being raised. Is the US now turning a blind eye, especially when it comes to US, India's sensitivities, because the country is right here and not very far from the incident that was taken. Now, as far as all of Iran's military, is it actually a threat to Donald Trump? Because he's been saying that he's going to eliminate everything. He's going to leave Iran defenseless. There is no going to be any question of land, air or sea power to Iran. Now, another question, because this is what being called as multiple leaders from within US calling out on this illegal war on Iran and saying, is Donald Trump actually abiding by the US Constitution or actually is violating it? Because the US Senate, however, seems to have been given a go-ahead to carry out the war. However, when it comes to, could the US actually use Lemoa to drag India into the war? Because this question that has now been raised, was this Iranian warship actually posing a real threat to Washington, because it was actually conducting and wasn't on its way back after conducting those naval exercises with India. Now, is Washington and Israel's action actually legal? When we speak of international law, one really has to raise those questions. Now, on the question in particular as to why India cannot be held responsible, because top sources suggest that the last port for the IRIS Dina was in Habantota, which was in Sri Lanka, and the ship had departed from the coast of Visakhapatnam after the completion of the Milan exercise, which concluded 3 days before the war actually began, and that was actually through pictures that was also shared by the Eastern Command. So why India can't be faulted over here? Because the last port call was in Sri Lanka. Now, the ship had already departed from the coast of Visakhapatnam, where the conclusion of the joint naval exercise had happened. However, after that, the Iranian warship was no longer a guest of the Indian Navy. Indian Navy bears no responsibility, and the warship, however, did not seek India's support, and this incident that happened was on international waters, to which Sri Lanka and India both have now carried out their rescue operations. Now let's get you as far as this exclusive report that is coming in from the National Hospital in Galle in Sri Lanka, where the picture seems to be extremely disturbing, as the bodies of the crew members who were fished out of the waters and they have been shifted to the hospital mortuary that seems to be exceeding its capacity amid this tragic situation that seems to be unfolding on ground. So US President Donald Trump, however, says that Iran's Navy and Air Force are gone. Their Navy is finished. He's adding that the US has wiped out 24 ships in the last 3 days. And he's added that the country's anti-aircraft weapons and airplanes are gone. Now, Donald Trump gave this briefing, this update on war on the top event celebrating a Major League Soccer champion, imagine. While celebrations are taking place on one side, but here is tragedy that seems to be unfolding and escalating with every passing day in Iran.
The United States military, together with the wonderful Israeli partners, continues to totally demolish the enemy far ahead of schedule and at levels that people have never seen before, actually. We're destroying more of Iran's missiles and drone capability every single hour, knocking them out like nobody thought was possible. As soon as they set off a missile, within 4 minutes, the launcher gets hit. They don't know what's happening. But we have the greatest military anywhere in the world. Their Navy is gone. 24 ships in 3 days. That's a lot of ships. Their anti-aircraft weapons are gone. So they have no air force. They have no air defense. All of their airplanes are gone. Their communications are gone. Missiles are gone. Launches are gone. About 60% and 64% respectively. Other than that, they're doing quite well. I said, what's left? But they're tough, and they want to fight. And they're calling, they're saying, how do we make a deal? I said, you're being a little bit late, and we want to fight now more than they do. We've had 47 years, depending on the way you count it, but 47 years of horror with this group. And, you know, when you see somebody walking down the street without their legs, without the arms, whose face is so badly affected and hurt.
Well, Utkarsh sir, when we speak of these war games that Donald Trump seems to be talking of, is this a concern where multiple questions have been raised? Can actually any role that India could have played, especially when it comes to sinking of this warship of Iran?
See, this Dina was actually unprepared for war. It had come for a ceremonial drill and a tactical exercise. So, sinking an unprepared and unarmed ship is actually unethical. And there is another Iranian Navy ship, which is the Iris Busher. It has been taken over by Sri Lankan Navy, and all the cadets and all the sailors have been taken ashore, and they have been detained there. The same thing could have been done for Iris Dina. It was purposely torpedoed to create a sensation. But Amitabh, one more thing which worries me here, that we always claim that Indian Ocean is ours, and India has the biggest navy in this part of the world. A submarine which sneaks up to Sri Lankan waters, and we have no clue about it. This is very worrisome thing. It is very worrisome thing that it has came so close to our waters, and we had no clue, nor the US shared this thing with us. So all you know that the US is maintaining this kind of surveillance on our waters also. So this is a bad thing. Another thing you mentioned, LIMOA, Logistic Exchange Memorandum of Agreement, which we have signed with the US. Would the US ask us to stand by this agreement during this war and service and provide logistic support to the US ships in the Indian Ocean? Because US is
Right, sir.
facing the pinch of this because they have no administrative support, and sooner or later they would be asking us.
Yes, sir.
So how would we dealing with that problem?
Well, there is another problem that now seems to be, coming up, and that is for Saudi Arabia, because we're getting another round of breaking update. Pratikrit, I'll just come to you. Let's bring this focus on 2 drones having now been intercepted and destroyed in the eastern province of Al-Kharj. Now, this is being reported where the Saudi Ministry of Defense announces that 2 drones have been intercepted and destroyed on the eastern province and the other east of Al-Kharj, where this was stated by their official spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense and Shinjoy. The drones that have now been, however, one of them has been destroyed, but this seems to be a continuous, if we can call it, invasion that Iran is carrying out of Saudi through drones.
Yes, everyone knew that when war broke out, these places would be attacked. Places like Bahrain, places like Kuwait, even Qatar, because there are American bases there. It wasn't expected that the Saudis would be attacked. The Saudi refineries would be attacked. And now you've seen 2 drones entering Saudi airspace, and they've been neutralized, they've been shot down. But the fact that countries like Saudi Arabia would be hit, the fact that Azerbaijan would be hit, primarily these are both oil-producing countries, Saudis hugely, of course, was not expected. But now you can understand that this is basically to put pressure on oil prices, to ensure that oil prices shoot up, to ensure that the international community is affected, and then puts pressure on the Americans to end the war as quickly as possible. So, yes, 2 drones intercepted over Saudi Arabia airspace. One we hear has been neutralized.
Yes, well, that is the information that has been coming in because oil refineries in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia that has been hit. We're looking at the U.S. embassy there in Riyadh that has been hit. We're looking at several other areas because Iran continues to fire. And, as far as these strikes are now concerned, we're looking at a possible slip-up that is now may have also happened. Now, when certain Iranian missiles seems to have slipped past the U.S. air defense. Let's get you these pictures that have now been coming in because what the Iranian agencies have been claiming. They say that the air defense breach has been now reported in Qatar. Now, the claim goes on to say that the Iranian missile evaded the U.S. shield and Iran strike that could be seen over the sky in Qatar, and that is now been coming in according to the pictures there because this is the Qatar-U.S. air defense where, however, Iran claims that the U.S. air defense failed to intercept the Iranian missile, and that has now been reported in Qatar with these pictures that have been coming in. So pretty dramatic there as we are looking at this escalation there. None of the countries in the Gulf region so far have not been hit or in a way attacked by Iran. We're looking at the escalation now seems to be going beyond as far as the neighbors of Iran is also concerned. We'll be getting you the updates continuously and more comprehensive coverage that happens right here on Times Now.